I'm so delighted to be here. I once belonged to another member library, the London Library in London, which is where I feel that I became a writer there. I didn't do an MFA, I worked in publishing, and then I moved to London and had a chance to write full-time for a bit to see if I could make a go of it. And I found the London Library and became a member, and that was my workspace for several years. And so member libraries are just very, very special places, and I'm very glad to be here tonight. And I can't believe I'm here tonight with Alice Elliott Dark, who has been one of my favorite writers since I can remember. I read in the Gloaming and in the New Yorker when it came out, and her short stories and novels have meant so much to me over the years. And when I moved to New York and met her and became friends, it just seemed too good to be true. So thank you, Alice, for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
So I feel, well, this audience more than others probably does know more about Penelope Fitzgerald than usual, but I still feel that I owe an explanation for how it is I came to write a novel about an English novelist of the last century, who many people don't know about. And so in 1999, I quit my job in publishing, moved to London with my husband, and as I noted, had a chance to write for the first time. And if it didn't go well, I was going to work in the pub, but hopefully I would make a go of it. And it wasn't going very well at first, and I was very homesick and lonely and not doing much writing. And one evening, my husband came home from work, and he had stopped in a bookstore and he'd gotten me a book to try to lift my spirits. And he picked it simply because it was set along the Thames in the same part of London where we were living in a temporary flat. And that novel that he gave me that evening was Offshore by Penelope Fitzgerald. And that was my first introduction to her work. I did not know of her. And I read it and I loved it. And I immediately read all the rest of her novels. And from that time on, she has been my favorite writer. And so over time, I learned a little bit about her. She was born in 1916 into a very well-educated literary English family. Her father was the editor of Punch magazine, and she had an uncle who worked on cracking the Enigma code during World War II. He was a mathematician and a cryptologist. So she was expected to do great things, and she went to Oxford. She was in her mother's college, Somerville, and married right before the war. And then her husband went to the war. And when he returned, they started their family. And so the important thing to know about why she meant so much to me, I think originally was she didn't publish her first novel until she was 60. So as a young, I was in my 20s and I was hoping to write, and I felt like it was now or never. And I thought, well, wait a minute, maybe it isn't now or never. And that was so comforting and so inspiring. And that was one of the reasons I think I gravitated to her work. And so over time, I learned that in the early 50s, sorry. Yeah, there we go. My nose is running. I'm not sick. I just always have a damp nose, but don't be alarmed. So in the early 50s, her family was not doing very well financially. She was a young mother. She had 2 young children, a third on the way. And this is when she makes this trip to northern Mexico that very little is known about. Her family and friends did not know why she was going. And that is where my story begins. And I thought I would read a little bit from the opening of the novel. And then Alice and I will talk. So it begins on, the first chapter is called Day of the Dead. In 1952, November 2nd fell on a Sunday. And that afternoon, a mother and son stood in front of the Delaney house in Fonseca, Mexico, poised to knock. They had traveled a long way, were quite stunned, mainly from the last leg of their journey through the American South. And now it was late afternoon, the day after the day they were supposed to have arrived. The season was warm, and in the square behind them, people were wearing calaveras, and the air smelled of smoke and marigolds. In the distance, and also quite nearby, they heard the pop and spray of fireworks. A band was playing in the square, the music brassy and bright, punctuated by shouts. It was all very disconcerting, and even though he didn't know who or what was behind the door, the boy wanted to go inside. In all his 6 years, he had never entered a house that did not have someone making or about to make tea, but his mother would not knock. "This isn't a holiday," Valby said, turning to sit down on the front step. A young woman passed, chewing a large sugar calavera with the name Pedro across the forehead. She was sobbing and laughing at the same time. The boy's mother sat down next to him. "How can you tell?" "I've never had new clothes for a holiday before." "That's not true," Penelope said. "What about your bathing costume last summer?" He didn't say anything. They both knew bathing costumes didn't count. "And this is a very strange house." The gray stone with wood shutters in the French style was at odds with all the buildings around it, every one stucco in the colors of sunset. The house stood right up against the pavement, 3 gabled sections around a shallow front courtyard. 5 steps led up from the front wall to what looked like the door of a castle keep, old oak with iron bolts and bars. Above and to the left was a heavy, rounded balcony that reminded Penelope of a pulpit. There were several tall chimneys, 2 dormers, and a number of mullioned windows in various sizes, all shuttered. Old, twisted pecan trees on the street further darkened the front. "Yes, but there's nothing to be afraid of," Penelope said. This was an error. Valby had not said he was afraid, and now Penelope saw that he was looking at the trees and the heavy little balcony and wondering if he should be. "We were invited," she reminded him quickly. "But why were we invited?" "The Delaney's are old friends." "But why do they want to see us?" Later, when the house in Southwold was emptied, and even later, when their houseboat Grace went down, Penelope would remember this moment on the step of the house in Fonseca. Everyone has a point to which the mind reverts naturally when it is left on its own. This was hers. "It's hard to explain," she said. This was not untrue. The Delaneys, 2 wealthy old women, had written to Penelope more than half a year ago to say they were alone in the world, all their relations in Ireland were gone, and because of some distant friendship between their families, they hoped to meet Valby. Indeed, if Penelope had understood their letters correctly, they suggested they might leave him all their money. This possibility was tantalizing for a number of very pressing reasons. She stood and knocked quickly, pecan shells cracking underfoot. "Dios mio, 2 of you," the housekeeper exclaimed, pulling open the heavy door. "Have you just come from the bus?" She was about 50, with wide, bare arms under a red apron. Her dark hair was pulled into a middle part, the length of it braided and wound on top of her head, a yellow marigold tucked behind one ear, heavy cheeks flushed under blue eyes. Penelope, who was not particularly tall, towered over her. Valby bravely cleared his throat. "Yes, but first we were on the Queen Mary, then the bus. It was a long and terrible ride. Actually, first we were on a train, but that wasn't part of the adventure because it was still in England." "That sounds right. Very few adventures begin and end in England," said the housekeeper. "Where was the boat's port of call?" "New York," Valby answered. "Good. One of you can take the bus back there." She took Valby's hand, suggesting Penelope would be the one returning. Penelope countered with a hand to Valby's shoulder. "But I notified Doña Elena that we were both coming." "I don't remember that letter." "Yet you know it was a letter," said Penelope. "How else would you have told her?" "I might have sent a telegram or phoned." The housekeeper narrowed her eyes. "Too expensive." She adjusted the marigold behind her ear. "We expected you yesterday." "I'm sorry, we were delayed in San Antonio." "That was the terrible part," Valby said. The housekeeper nodded as if she understood, but how could she have known what happened? The 3 stood on the doorstep, seemingly at an impasse. Finally, Penelope said, "This is ridiculous. He's only 6 years old. He never could have made this journey alone." "Why?" the housekeeper said, scrutinizing Valby. "Is there something wrong with him?" Valby shook his head. "Of course not," Penelope said, "but it would be a very long journey for so young a child." "How far is it?" Valby knew the exact mileage from the front door of their house, Chestnut Lodge, Hampstead, London, to the doorstep where they were standing in Zona Centro, Fonseca, Mexico. "That is far," the housekeeper said. "He should be with his mother." Penelope was relieved. "Now we agree. I am his mother." The housekeeper sighed. She stepped backward, pulling the door with her. "I am Chela. Welcome to Mirando." Penelope didn't move. "I thought this was the Delaney house?" Yes, come in." It was an inauspicious, topsy-turvy start, and Penelope never forgot it. Dear, I was so interested in your letter with its description of how you came to know my mother's work. Interested and also reassured, because I can see that you understand her and her life as far as one can ever know or understand other people's lives. I often wonder why I didn't ask her more about herself and decisions she made. And then I remember that she always evaded questions and never gave direct or detailed answers. My brother Valpy lives in a remote mountain village in Spain most of the year, though he also has a small townhouse in Oxford where he was a professor. He would like to get in touch to share his memories of the 1952 trip to Mexico, to Saltillo, not Fonseca. Thank you for telling us about Hopper. His Mexican paintings are so atmospheric and you can feel the heat. I think the dividing line between fiction and fact is quite blurred in her biographies and her novels, so you push on. With all best wishes, Tina. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. It was wonderful to hear you read it. I just want to say before we start talking that Jessica sent me this book a few months ago to read, to offer a blurb for it. And of course I was happy to, because I read all of Jessica's books and I love her writing and her brain and her dedication, everything. Everything that I admire in a writer, I admire in Jessica. And this book is so good. I just want to say that at the end. I think I wrote to you right away and I said, this is a great book. Like, this is literally a great book. And that's, I mean, I blurb a lot of books and that is rare. You know, it's rare to come across them. I think I said, this is going to be a classic. It's never going out of print. It's like it's one of the greats. So it's very fun to be able to talk about it with you and to hear more, because I have some questions. So first of all, that sounds so as if you've done a lot of research into the actual history of this trip, but there really is no information about what happened in this trip except that it happened.
Right.
Penelope went with her son Valpy. They were there for 3 months or so.
About.
Yeah, and from there you make all of it up, which I think is incredible. Even the plot. But there was a little hint that you got from an essay that she wrote.
Yes. That actually a friend here this evening who is a fabulous biographer in her own right, said that she thought I had followed a biographer's path to this novel. And I had never thought of it that way, but she's absolutely right. So I had read the Hermione Lee biography of Penelope Fitzgerald that came out in, I think, 2012 or 2013. And I loved it. It's a wonderful biography if you haven't read it. And the Mexico trip is mentioned and it's given about a page, I think a page, at the most a page. And so it didn't strike me. I read that biography and did not think, oh, how odd this Mexico trip is. In 2017, I read an essay by the English critic Lucy Scholes in Granta, and it was called The Peripatetic Penelope Fitzgerald. And the essay opens with a description of this journey to Mexico, the fact that she took a ship across the ocean and a Greyhound bus from New York down to northern Mexico with a 6-year-old in tow, 3 months pregnant in 1952, traveling alone as a woman. So, you know, a journey that would be hard today and would just seem kind of impossible in 1952. And so that morning, reading that essay at my kitchen table, I still can remember it. I thought, wait, hang on, why, what? why don't we know more about this? And so then in that essay, she mentions an essay that I had not known of called Following the Plot that Penelope Fitzgerald wrote much later in life. So in 1980, she writes an essay about, well, it's really about kinds of plots in novels. It's a critical essay and how novels work. But she opens it by saying, say I were to write a novel about a trip I made to Mexico 27 years ago with my son, then aged 5. And she sort of sets the scene. And there are these 2 paragraphs. There's just 2 paragraphs, but they have pecan trees and they have, they describe a dark house and these 2 ladies they're making a winter visit to. And then later in the essay, she closes by saying that she never felt she could write the Mexico book because of what she felt were the far-reaching complications of the Mexico legacy. So something there, I thought, okay, what does that mean? And so that's it. That's all we have about this trip. And so the novelist in me said, I I will follow the plot. Somebody has to write this book. I have to follow the plot. So that is how I came upon the story of the Mexico trip and made it into a story.
That's so, it's just like an incredible act of imagination to just take that little hint and make it into what you've made it into. There are a couple of things in your reading that I want to pick up on, but first I want to ask you, how did you get into her sensibility to be able to write about her? First place, how did you get
Yeah.
the nerve to take on your favorite author in this way? And how did you capture her way of thinking? Because your thoughts, your thoughts you attribute to her are so they're so deep and so real that I really feel like you did get close to her.
Thank you, Alice. So I was terrified. The idea of writing a book about my favorite writer just seemed very bad idea. So I was very worried, and I knew I didn't want to do an imitation. I knew an impersonation or an imitation would be a terrible mistake. But I knew that I wanted to write a book that I knew I wanted to create to find her sensibility. I wanted to write a character that would become the person who wrote the novels she ultimately wrote. So I think the way I began to do that was I reread the 9 novels that she ultimately, so she writes her first novel at 60, and she writes like The Wind until she died in 2000. And she wrote 9 perfect novels. They're all about 200 pages, and I love all of them. And so I reread them. And as I reread them, I underlined sentences and then ultimately transcribed those sentences into a document on my computer. And I called this document The Lines. And these were sentences that to me held some kind of clue to her style or to her way of thinking, something characteristic about her, or something that I thought might actually be a bit autobiographical. And it created a sort of scaffolding to her mind, and but something only I would understand. I mean, it's a crazy document, but that I think is how I began. But of course, I still had doubts, as any novelist does. And so the next thing that happened was I went down to Austin, to the Ransom Center in Austin, Texas, which strangely has a lot of her archives. Not all of them, some of them are at the British Library, but they have a fair bit of her archives. And I went down there not on a biographical research project. Really, I didn't think that Hermione Lee had left anything uncovered. It was just that I thought that if I put myself near her notebooks and I saw her handwriting and I was near all those materials, that I would be inspired somehow. And so I did that, and I gave myself 2 afternoons. And on the second afternoon, I'm sitting at the table and I have the Hermione Lee biography, which by this time is, stuffed full of Post-it notes. And it's right in front of me, and I'm working away, looking at her notebooks, and I feel a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Hermione Lee standing there. And she asks me what I'm doing with the Penelope Fitzgerald boxes, which she's recognized coming across the reading room all afternoon. And so I stumbled out something. She said, "Are you planning another biography?" And I said, "Oh no." And I said, "I'm thinking of a novel." And she said, she frowned, which I thought was funny. And she said, "Well, what part of the life?" And I said, "The Mexico trip." And then she smiled and she said, "That makes sense." And so, it was just a moment where I thought maybe the universe was saying, "You're on the right track, keep going." And it became, well, as you well know from writing novels, like things happen that just keep you moving forward little bits at a time.
That's so true. Once you start, it almost seems like everything is related to the book.
It runs
Everything
that way. Yeah.
It's really strange. So you read in your reading, you read a letter.
Yes.
And from her daughter, Tina. And are those real letters, or did you invent those letters?
So that is another part of the book and its history. Those are real letters that were written to me in response to questions I asked of Tina and Valpy, the adult children, now grown. Tina is her 2-year-old at the time of the trip, who she leaves in England with family. And Valpy, of course, comes with her. And she's pregnant with her 3rd daughter, Mariah, who's born 2 months after she returns. And so after the Austin trip and feeling like I was on the right track, I started writing, and I put some chapters together, showed them to my agent and editor. They said yes. And I was on my way, I thought. And then that was the summer of 2020. And then that fall, that September of 2020, I got an email from Terrence Dooley, who is the literary executor of the Penelope Fitzgerald estate and also was her son-in-law. He's married to Tina. And they'd seen news of the sale of Fonseca. And so they said, Terrence wrote, the family's very interested and would like to be in touch. And I stopped writing. I just was terrified again and thought, well, now what do I do? You know, I can't, this is very worrisome. So I put everything I had into a response about what Penelope's work meant to me, what I wanted to do. And I think I won them over because over time we began corresponding. They invited me to ask questions. And we emailed back and forth for 5 years. It still took a long time to write the book, but over the time that we were corresponding, at first I wasn't writing at all. And then I eventually began writing the book again, starting over completely, when I realized that the letters had to ultimately be part of it. That as a reader of Penelope Fitzgerald myself and a lover of her work, I knew that a novel about her, I would want to include these letters. I would want to see them. So I wanted to share them with readers of her work. And it's also true, as Tina says in that letter, her own work was very blend of fact and fiction. And so I think that's why they invite, when I asked them if I could use the letters, they agreed. And I think that's because they knew that it was reminiscent of the way she worked. And so it all came together that way.
Did you put all their letters in the book or did you choose?
I chose, yes, not all of them. The letters they are very lightly edited. The letters that are in the book are as largely as they were written to me, but they're not all of the letters that we exchanged. So they're woven through the narrative in a way that brings you kind of in and out of the story. So, you know, I was working with memories that were 70 years old. And in some cases, Valpy was remembering things that seemed to counter the essay she wrote following the plot, where she says a few things about the trip. And which interestingly, Valpy clearly read as fiction. He thought that essay was, you know, I took her at her word. She called it an essay, and I thought this should be read as nonfiction. But Valpy had always read it as fiction, and he knew that they were there. That we have Hermione Lee to thank for the fact that she checked manifests and she knew that they were on the ship and on the Greyhound bus, so they did indeed go. But he didn't know why they were there, and his memories. It's interesting, and you'll see through the letters, through the book as they unfold. He's remembering more, and he's reconsidering some of his memories, and so it's, you know, what is truth when you're talking about 70-year-old memories and perspectives.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Do you still think it was true what she wrote in the essay, that these 2 women, the house,
I do. I really do. I understand why he thought it might not be. As he points out to me in the letter, her own first novel was a mystery with set in a museum, not a grand house, but at the British Museum, and there's some similarities. So I understand. It's actually the line that you heard me read in the first chapter. This comes from that essay. I borrow it from her, and this was a key to me. This sentence: everyone has a point to which the mind reverts naturally when it is left on its own. That is from this essay following the plot, and she put that is right there in the essay, right after she has said, I couldn't write the Mexico novel because of the far-reaching complications of the Mexico
I
legacy.
wonder what that's all about.
So Exactly.
curious.
So, and it seemed to me that it was possible that this trip was at a time when she wanted very much to be a writer, but was not able to write because she was supporting the family. Her husband was an alcoholic. He had returned from the war, not physically damaged, but mentally very changed, suffering from PTSD and becoming an alcoholic. And their finances are terrible. Right after the Mexico trip, they have to close the journal, the literary journal that they run. They leave London rather suddenly and they move to Southwold, and eventually they do live on a houseboat that sinks. And so, she really did have to wait a long time to write. But so what if you take her at her word that she'd gotten letters about a legacy, and what if this was a last ditch effort to make a dream come true, to give herself time to write and sort of solidify her family? What would have that trip been like, and what might have happened that kind of haunted her whole life, stayed with her whole life, but she didn't write that. Oh, and it's important to note that her first 4 novels are highly autobiographical. So this is a woman who did use material from her life, but not this material. So, it's tempting.
I want to say that the novel's very funny. There's lots of humor in the book. And right from the beginning, one of the things I found very humorous in the setup was she gets there and she's not the only one who's been invited to sort of try out for this legacy. She gets there and there are a bunch of other people, and it sort of had an Agatha Christie vibe to it for me, like a house with people, and they're all kind of looking at each other. Are you the one who's gonna get it? And one thing that I found so interesting was Penelope doesn't put herself forward in this situation. She sees like the lay of the land with these other people, and she thinks that she has a good chance because she has this young son, and that seems to be what they were interested in. But I love that you didn't make her very aggressive about this, that she sort of pulls back and is more of an observer in that situation. So how did you decide what her approach would be to pursuing the legacy?
Again, the biography, thinking about her life and knowing that, she had 2 grandfathers who were bishops. She came from she was an Anglican, married to a Catholic. She had 2 grandfathers were bishops. 2 uncles were in the church. One was an Anglican priest. One actually converted to Roman Catholicism and became a Roman Catholic priest. The Anglican priest had taken a vow of poverty. I think that she had very complicated feelings about pursuing money openly. I think she knew it would help. I knew she wanted to be able to have her family safe and be able to maybe have time to write, but the idea of openly pursuing money might have made her very uncomfortable, I think, from what I know of her biography and the family that she revered and what they thought about money. So I think she would have gotten there. She refers to the other people in the essay. Again, all the clues come from the essay. She refers to them as pretenders, the other pretenders. So that's interesting too. She says the other pretenders, so she's there. She gives them this rather derogatory name, that they're there pretending, to try to earn the legacy. And so I think she would have just thought, what have I gotten myself into? But having come so far, she decides to stay. So that's where the story really unfolds, because why did she stay and what happened while she was there.
So a couple of the other people there are the Hoppers, Edward and Joe Hopper, and they were there. Were they there?
Yes,
literally at the same time?
I do know. Yes, so they were not guests of the house, but as I began to research Saltillo in 1952, I learned that it was an artist center. People came to paint and write, and the climate was considered far better than Mexico City. So artists would come up from Mexico City there. And the Hoppers had been there twice in the 1940s, and in the winter of 1952, they were there again to paint. And so it is not known if Penelope met them, but it seemed, it was one of these tantalizing possibilities because she was very astute about art. She was an amateur artist herself. One of her books is a biography of the pre-Raphaelite painter Edward Burne-Jones. So she knew about art, and the idea that I could bring them together and explore that possibility. He was there, of course, with his wife, Jo, who was a very, her artistic career had been completely subsumed to his. And so they represented a different version of an artistic marriage. And Penelope Fitzgerald is at a moment where she's trying to figure out if she's going to stay in her artistic marriage. And so this double portrait was really tantalizing. And I should point out, this is a hopper. This is a hopper that the Met owns. It's not on view, but it's called Saltillo Mansion. And he painted from the rooftops while he was there because he found the city, at city level, it was too hectic for him. So he would paint on the rooftop. And I got to spend time with this it's actually a watercolor. He only worked in watercolor when he was in Mexico. And I got to spend time with this painting. And then Penguin got permission to use it on the cover, which was really great, I thought.
It is. It's wonderful.
So,
do you want to read a little bit more?
Oh yeah. So you know what might be fun? I'll read, since we've talked so much about the house and these and the pretenders. The other thing to know is that the last detail from the essay that I think I haven't mentioned, the pretenders and the pecan trees and the two women, is that there's a wonderful sentence. She says that she learns as she could tell on the first night she arrived, that the Delaney sisters were slowly drinking themselves to death. And that there was a moment of clarity, two hours of clarity, when the pretenders would come, make their cases, and then the evenings were spent in these soirees, these cocktail parties. And so I think the irony of the fact that she had traveled this far for a legacy to survive her marriage to a man who was drinking too much, only to find out that the legacy was controlled by two women also drinking too much, was probably not lost on her. But all right, so this is the beginning of the chapter called Signs. Oh, okay. All she had to do was find a way to distinguish herself in a drawing room halfway across the world. It sounded simple, but it wasn't. The irony of having traveled so far to try for a legacy for her life with a husband who drank too much, only to find the money controlled by two women seemingly drinking themselves to death, was not lost on her. The Donia's drinking was staggering. Each evening they began with a glass of sherry. If it was not a cocktail night or a feast day, they would have at least 3 or 4 more. If it was a cocktail night, after the sherry, they enjoyed 2 or 3 of these. Penelope had been at Mirando 2 weeks, and so far, in addition to the whiskey marigolds, there had been palomas and pink gins, gimlets, martinis, and Manhattans. The wine at dinner was excellent, most of it imported from France, and the Donias always finished a bottle each. Afterward, they had port or brandy, sometimes both, and on Sundays, the champagne was served in the Mirando cut glass flutes, sometimes with 2 ounces of Guinness, brought in from El Dublin, the Irish pub across the square. This was called a black velvet and had been a favorite of Don Guillermo's. At this rate of consumption, a very real question might be, how much of the legacy was left? Also striking to Penelope was how evocative the scene was of a story they'd just published in their October issue, The Followers by Dylan Thomas. She remembered bits and pieces of the paragraph describing the saloon, where the regulars grew grand and muzzy in the corners, and grannies in dustbin black cackled and nipped. There was even a crippled piano. She would write to Thomas when she got back and tell him. So that bit there actually does refer to the fact that she and Desmond keep the journal running while she's in Mexico. They correspond while she's away, and they keep it was called the World Review, and it ran for a number of years and was very highly regarded and made no money, of course.
Yeah, we know what that's like. So something I always think about when I'm reading a book is what happens in the exact middle of the book. And it's really kind of fascinating because on the middle page of pretty much any good novel, because good novels tend to be very balanced, whether the author is conscious of it or not. Something happens that turns the book. And I loved on the exact middle page of this book, and this is not going to be a spoiler. This is not really a book you can spoil because it's all about the writing and the atmosphere. But you have this beautiful paragraph about Penelope felt the chapter is called Waiting. And do you want to just read the very end of that?
So Alice and I talked a few days ago for this event to sort of discuss what we might talk about. And she mentioned this theory of the middle of the book to me, which I'll now be doing with every book that I read. And it's so true. It's crazy, Alice.
It's crazy.
So
once you notice it, you can't look away.
So she told me this, and she's absolutely right. So the exact middle of this book is a chapter called Waiting. And as you've heard me saying tonight, I think that what brought me to this project was the sense of how long Penelope had to wait to do the work she wanted to do. She wanted to be a writer from the time she left Oxford, and she doesn't write her first book till she's 60. So, this wait and the waiting was really something I thought a lot about as I was writing. So this is the chapter called Waiting, and it ends. So she's, let's see, where should I read from? She's in her room at the top of Miranda. They're given a little blue room at the top of the house, and she's just been corresponding with Desmond, who's asked her if she has time to write. Has she been able to see any art? And could she write an article for the journal, because they're short one for the upcoming issue. So she's thinking about that. And let's see. So she told him she would consider writing something for the journal. She'd like to see the murals of Rivera and Siqueiros if she could get to Mexico City, though she had no idea how she would arrange that. Lastly, she mentioned that a man named Delaney had arrived. If this were a fairy tale, it would be hard to imagine a more perfect heir. He is intelligent, charming, and good-looking. He sings and plays the piano. The other night, Liszt's Campanella. And although I have not seen him dance, I can imagine he does so quite well. He's a good storyteller, appears to have a sense of humor, and keeps his head in a room full of drunk people. Sometimes we are the only two. If what he says is true, and he is indeed related to the Donias, Valby and I should probably start packing our bags. She made a small sketch of a vase of marigolds at the bottom, put the letter in an envelope, and sealed it. Her notebook sat on the corner of the desk, still blank, but for the list of pretenders she'd started. She had been waiting to write something until things at Fonseca were clearer, just as she'd been waiting for Desmond to get back from the war, waiting until a child was born, waiting until they had more room in the house, waiting until they had more money, waiting until she finished yet another article to shore up the journal. That day in Fonseca, in her room at the top of Miranda, she decided to stop. She turned the notebook upside down, making the back the front, opened the cover, and began something new.
I just love, I get chills right now when I hear that, because it feels to me like your energy, your imagination, just even though she doesn't publish her first book till she's 60, you're giving her in your imagination she's like, okay, I'm just not going to be like just writing these articles. And then there are a couple more things that happen that set her on this path, her relationship with Joe Hopper, and then another conversation she has. But here she is like, okay, maybe I'm just going to start writing now. Right. Which I loved so much. Yeah. Did you surprise yourself when you did that, or was that part of your conception of the book?
No, I remember that scene surprised me. I do have to confess, the idea of turning the notebook upside down and backwards is something she did. I knew that from having seen those notebooks in Austin, and that's how she began the bookshop, one of her second novel. So she was on a trip and she had a travel journal and she turned it around upside down and backwards and started the bookshop. And so I remember that. I remember thinking, well, what if that's something she had tried once earlier in life and gave it to her earlier when she's 35 in Mexico. But I didn't. But the idea of deciding to try to write something new, to try to move into the realm of fiction, that was just what, yeah, I don't outline, I don't plot, so
It
that,
felt that way because it really did give me gooseflesh when I read it, because I could feel like she's waiting, the way you wrote it, she's waiting for this, and
Yeah.
I feel like the energy is gonna break. And then all of a sudden she turns it upside down and starts working on something. So good. I think it's time to open it up for questions. I have many more, but
sure. What time is it? Oh, yes. Oh, great, some questions.
I love the book. I just finished it. I'm curious about this decision to refer to the Delaney as the Delaney for most of the book.
Yes.
And
Penelope refers to him in her mind as the Delaney.
Right.
Yes, okay, so for those who haven't read it, this man does show up, who claims that he's related to the Donias and becomes one of the pretenders, but may be related. And so he moves into the house and he's also there. And they are, so I explore the idea of them being intrigued by each other. They're equally intelligent and sort of can match wits, and something like that would have been very appealing to her. And but she, you know, I was also very compelled by the idea that she must have loved her husband very much. She stayed with him until he died. And her first novel was written actually as an entertainment for him as he was on his, final decline. And so, she may have been tempted by someone, but I think she would have wanted to keep him at arm's length. And I think she did, in my mind, she's a person who would do that. Her habit of mind would be to put something formal in front of his name. So the Delaney would kind of keep him at a distance, and he becomes sort of more than he is in that way. But and because she doesn't know if he is or not, he may or may not be. That's actually kind of left ambiguous. Well, now I'm giving too much away.
not really.
Okay, all right. So yes, I thought it might be something she would do if she were writing a story, which I don't, that's, I guess that's.
It was charming that he was called the Delaney. I love that.
Are there any other questions? Oh, yes.
So just to follow on that, I love that page where she's talking about why she isn't gonna leave Desmond, because if he hadn't done this, I love that page.
Oh, thank you.
I was gonna ask you, with this whole kind of dynamic tension about what's fact and what's fiction, and when they find the notebook and Balky says, why couldn't you have written fact? Right?
The truth. He says that, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what to me that kind of encapsulates what you were saying, and what's fact and what's truth and what's fiction, and
Right.
and all put together. I was just curious.
Yeah. So that scene does bring together a lot of the themes of the book. So she is working on a short story. So what she begins in the notebook that she turns upside down is a short story. In my head, it is indeed the short story that she does write, called Our Lives Are Only Lent to Us, which is a story she wrote and some years after the Mexico trip, that does seem to be set in a landscape like Fonseca. So my idea was that if she were working on that story while she was there, and in that story it is very much a story that is looking at the comedy and the tragedy of two cultures misunderstanding each other, in a northern Irish expat community in northern Mexico. And so she says in that story some things that are very true about how people can misunderstand each other. And but if you were if you were to read that story and it was about you and you recognized yourself in that story, you might not want that to be true of you. And so that's what happens with the Donias. And so, but then, so they, the thing is, what did you say to me, Alice, the other day? You said that like everything is, it's fiction, but it's all true. Or like, I'm not describing this very well. It's that I think I think Valpy knew that she was being, they were being misunderstood. And so he recognized that as a story, and he's only 6. And so he couldn't see the sort of cultural truth that was in it. And that's what she was working on in her fiction. And so it's just a clash. It's just a clash of all the characters and all of their motivations, in that moment, misunderstanding each other. And Penelope Fitzgerald was a master of misunderstanding. And I think that's what she wrote about most powerfully in all of her novels, is the pain of misunderstanding and how just the pain of misunderstanding people, people we love, people we meet. So that's what that scene is trying to capture. Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the meeting, the title? Because I think that's another.
Oh, that is a very good point. Yes. It's so, that's true. So in the letter, you notice Tina corrects me and says, that her mother traveled to Saltillo, not Fonseca. And but in that essay following the plot, she only ever refers to it as Fonseca. She does not call it Saltillo. And the family did not know why. And the speculation is, I think, that it's because in Latin it means, a loose translation is dry well. And I think it was a joke to herself about what the trip ultimately was, so that she did not get the legacy. It was an attempt, and so she must have thought of it that way to herself, and always and only referred to Fonseca, never Saltillo. And it's funny, I for a long time didn't know what to call the book, and I had a notebook on which I had all these possible working titles that go all the way down the front cover. And then one day I thought, well, it's got to be Fonseca. It should be the name she gave the town that doesn't really exist. So that's how I entitled the book. So right there, it's sort of true and not true. It is based on Saltillo. We know she was in Saltillo, but she only ever called it Fonseca. So, that alone allows you, or I felt it gave me the freedom to fictionalize and bring a little magic to the place.
Any other questions? I have another one.
You're spoken over here.
You first.
So I was wondering, as you were writing, whether you felt like Penelope Fitzgerald was there with you, or that you had become her, or that, was she kind of telling you the story at any point? Was it just sort of coming out because you felt like it happened somewhere and that it was being told to you? I'm like just wondering how that process went.
Yeah. I certainly didn't feel that I was her. I definitely had the sense of maybe she was looking over my shoulders. Maybe, again, like the meeting of Hermione Lee in the library, and other little things that happened. I think I've told the story before that the day I finished the first draft of what was going to be the final book, because I did start over many times. But the final draft, when I finished it, I had to take my cat to the emergency eye veterinarian doctor because of something, but she's fine. The cat's fine. But I was there and I had really just finished the draft, and the cat was fine, and we're getting up to leave, and the person behind the desk calls the next patient and says, Fonseca? And I thought, wait, what? What's the word? I'm hearing things. But I went up to the woman and said, so that somebody got up and took in I think it was a little dog, went into behind the, back to the appointment rooms. And I went up to the front desk and I said, what was the name of that pet? And she looked down, she said, Fonseca. So, and there are other things like this. I actually wrote an essay about all of what I think of as the Fonseca coincidences that happened in the years that I was writing this. And it's in LitHub if you're interested. But so I think those things made me feel like she was pointing the way somehow, and I was just trying to follow her plot. She titled the essay "Following the Plot," and then she didn't follow it, so I I decided to.
Do you feel like it changed your writing? I mean, our writing changes all the time, but do you feel like thinking so much about her changed your approach or your writing or your style?
It certainly did for this book, and as I try to get to work on something new, I am wondering what next, because this was different from my other work, and it just came in a different way, and I think it sounds different, and so I can't do that again, and I don't want to do that again. Actually, I like to do different things with each book, but it's not clear to me yet what that will be, and I feel like I have to find a new way.
Did you think that you wanted to sort of pay an homage to her short books and just in the form of this book?
That's a great question, Alice. I totally did. I told myself this is not going to be longer than 200 pages, and I thought that I would write it fast and it would be short.
Always, that's always the delusion.
So I didn't do it. It's longer, and Penelope
Just a little bit.
just a little. It's on the shorter side. I think what is it, 250, but 256. Or but she felt less is more. She wrote she always worried that her novels were too short, or at least in the beginning she did. And then in a letter to her editor, she says at one point, I try to make them longer, but I just don't think they need it. I think less is more, and I do too. So I did want it to be a short novel like one of hers, and I didn't quite achieve that, but close.
And have her children spoken to you about reading the book?
They have. They've been supportive. They when they agreed that the letters could be used, they asked if they could have permission to read the manuscript before it was published, and of course I agreed. And they both really liked the book very much, and wrote me wonderful things. And Tina actually said something which I really, really treasure, which is that she said, somehow you've managed to sound, let's see, what did she say? So somehow you managed to sound like my mother and also completely like yourself. I was captivated.
That's how I felt. Sorry. That's how I felt too.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So they've been very, very supportive, and I'm sending them the reviews as they come in, and it's very nice. Yeah.
So something new is in the works?
Barely. Getting there.
Any other
Any other
questions?
questions?
Well, congratulations
Thank
again
you.
so much, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Alice.